and that and the reason it's the reason human behavior is complex and messy is that human beings, including leaders, don't always act consistently or predictably. We would all like to think we're consistent and predictable, but the evidence is overwhelming that we're not. And so we want to acknowledge that, and we want to also acknowledge that William of Ockham, this is his insight is sometimes referred to as Occam's razor. He was onto something really important, and that's this idea that the simpler that we can explain things, not simplistic, but simple. I think of simplistic as the near side of complexity, and simple is the far side. The best way that I can illustrate that is probably all of us are aware of the famous equation that Albert Einstein had, E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That famous equation that we've all probably seen at one time or another, turns out that he did not arrive at that initially. In fact, you go back and you look at his so to speak, sketchbooks, and he's got pages and pages of equations. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to get to this keen insight, but he has to work through the complexity of it. So he comes to a simple insight, but not simplistic. So I think William of Ockham is leading us in that direction. If we can find simple ways to understand human behavior, they probably will be helpful. And so here I want to lean very heavily on some research that was actually done and published back in the 1980s. And quite honestly, I have read lots of other studies and books in the intervening decades, and I've never found anything that's nearly as simple and clean as McClelland's insights. And then especially two of his graduate students, two women, one named Ruth Jacobs and the other Mary Fontaine. They really built upon McClelland's key insights here in terms of what I'm calling the three primary drivers of behavior. So these drivers of behavior are not going to account for all human behavior, but I think as we go along, we'll see that they really do account for a lot of human behavior, and they meet Occam's razor of being simple. So the first drive of human behavior we're going to label affiliation. The second, we're going to label the drive for achievement. So the drive for affiliation, the drive for achievement, and then finally the drive for influence. So let me kind of walk through all three of those, starting with what is unquestionably the strongest of those three drivers, and that's the drive for affiliation. Now, the drive for affiliation is not unique to human beings, actually. In fact, all mammals have this deeply embedded DNA level drive for affiliation, and we see it in other animals, not just mammals, for example, birds and fish in particular. But this deep drive is for being in groups because evolutionarily speaking, we're all much safer physically for all animals, and then as we'll see, physically and psychologically for human beings. So the drive for affiliation is very powerful because, again, it's at that DNA level, not just in us, but in almost all other animals on the planet. Now, when we talk about the drive for human affiliation, however, now we can be very specific. So the primary test here is going to be to maintain or avoid disruption of close, friendly relationships with people. Again, this idea, this drive for affiliation is going to create the physical safety. That's part of it, and that we share in common with all other animals. But then for us, it also creates this psychological safety. So we're trying to maintain or create, and certainly avoid disrupting close, friendly relationships. Now, when this drive or need is aroused, we're going to be thinking about, or we're going to be concerned with the establishment, restoration, or maintenance of close, warm relationships. So we have that strong drive to have close, warm relationships. And the way it plays out, and this is really important, is we have this incredibly strong drive as human beings to be liked and accepted by others. In addition to that, when this drive is aroused in us, then our activities are principally around social bonding. And here what we're trying to do is create group cohesion and harmony. So we see this playing out, for example, in things like uniforms. Often groups in the performance of their activities will wear uniforms. Now, it could certainly be formal uniforms like a sports team or an acting troupe. They would all have uniforms, if you will. They would have costumes. But it's also in that drive that we see, I think, particularly on university campuses, but not specifically to university campuses, where groups of people will purposefully dress alike, maybe not identically, but they'll dress similarly, and that those clothing choices, those hairstyle choices. Of course, not for people like me. I don't have a choice for a hairstyle. I'm bald. But people like all of you who have hair, you can cut your hair, you can color it, and the choice of clothes and shoes, those are all, and jewelry, adornment like that, those are all ways of signaling to others within our group, so to speak, that we are a group, and it's a harmonious sense when we can identify with each other. So that's also going on. And I would, let me jump back just to make sure I didn't skip it. Yeah. And I would argue that a lot of human behavior can be explained by that drive for affiliation. In fact, for me, when I'm trying to understand my own or other people's behavior, this is the first thing I ask is, how is my behavior or other people's behavior trying to signal to the group that they want to be part of, that in fact they are part of them? So that's the first drive. The second one is almost the exact opposite. Now it's what is called the drive for achievement. So if we think about the drive for affiliation as wanting to just be kind of swallowed up in the group, if you will, losing our identity, so to speak, to some degree, as being part of a group, the drive for achievement is 180 degrees out from that. It's the exact opposite. It's wanting to be different. It's wanting to be distinguished as an individual. So when this, so the primary test for this would be meeting or exceeding some standard of excellence or improving one's performance. So that's what's getting at this idea of achievement, is we want to meet or exceed some standard of excellence, or if there's not an external sense, then we want to be improving our own performance. So when this need gets aroused, then we're going to be thinking about or concerned with outperforming another person or another person when they represent excellence or high achievement. So that would be one way of behaving with this drive for achievement, would be to try and outdo someone else, outperform. Also, however, it could be a self-imposed standard of excellence or high achievement. So I don't have to necessarily, and this is important, I don't have to necessarily be competing against someone external to myself. I could be competing against myself. So trying to improve as I go along. It's also, when it's aroused, We want to be engaged in things that are new or unique or innovative. So that drive to create new things, to create innovations, things like that is this drive for achievement. And then finally, it plays out in very practical ways of wanting to be involved in long-term planning or advancement of one's career. So behavior that can't be explained by a drive for achievement, for a drive for affiliation, sometimes can be can be recognized as a drive for achievement. I'll give you a very simple illustration. So when I first started with UC Davis 26 years ago, I was an academic within an academic department. So I had a chair, and I actually had a great chair. I had two chairs initially in sequence, both just absolutely fantastic. Each of them very supportive of my own academic achievement. They just happened to be women, but they were just terrific leaders, terrific chairs, and I felt very supported by them. And because I've got a pretty strong drive for achievement myself, I wanted to be a department chair as well. Even though once I became a department chair, my career at the university kind of stalled out. Whereas when I was just a member of a department as opposed to the chair of the department, my career was moving along very rapidly. So this drive for achievement doesn't always result in good outcomes. So drive for affiliation, drive for achievement, and then finally the third drive is this drive for influence. So the primary test here is having an influence or making an impact on others. So when this drive gets need is aroused, now we're thinking about or concerned with performing powerful actions. For example, and this is critical, giving unsolicited advice, help, or support. The key there is not only advice, help, and support, but also unsolicited. So when this drive is aroused, we don't wait to be invited or asked to help other people. We take the initiative. We say, let me help you with that, or let me give you some ideas on that, things like that. So that's kind of the first manifestation, is giving unsolicited advice, help, or support. The second would be gaining control of a situation, a group of people through influence or persuasion. And then if neither of those work, then through intimidation. So we have to understand that this drive for influence is also about a drive for power. In fact, that's the term that was originally used. I tend to shy away from that because power has such negative connotations nowadays, but an influence tends not to have the same kind of negative connotations, but that's what's really going on here. A drive for influence is a drive for power, of wanting to influence and persuade others to behave or think in particular ways. And again, if those don't work, then to use intimidation. The ability to arouse strong emotions in others. So you remember some of the images I had for this were people like Dolores Huerta and Margaret Thatcher, Nancy Pelosi, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. All of them aroused very strong, very positive in many cases, emotions from people. And that was part of their effectiveness as a leader, is they could in many instances, not all of 6 of those, because I think Margaret Thatcher certainly aroused strong passions in the British people, but I'm not certain it was always for particularly noble ends. But all 6 of them aroused strong emotions in people. And as a consequence, that enhanced their reputation as a leader, their position as a leader, and then, of course, their strength as a leader. So behavior that can't be identified by a drive for affiliation, or a drive for achievement can likely be explained as the drive for influence. Now, I want to say what I said a few minutes ago. These three drivers don't explain all human behavior. But my experience is I'm pretty hard pressed to figure out human behavior that doesn't fit into one of these three drives. So, and here's where McClelland's work really gets picked up by his two, I would argue, most important graduate students. They weren't necessarily his most famous, but I think they did the most important work, Mary Fontaine and Ruth Jacobs. So what those two did was they started looking at the behavior of leaders and trying to understand those behaviors in terms of these three drivers. And they developed a very, from my point of view, very elegant, very simple, not simplistic, but simple and elegant framework for understanding what they categorized as 6 different suites of behavior or leadership styles. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through all 6 of them now. So remember that drive for achievement is wanting to be separate from a group to achieve mastery over things and excellence. So that drive for achievement resulted in a leadership set of behaviors or style that they labeled pace setting. So the pace setting style of behavior, we can be thought of, and that's the whole idea behind a pace setter in running. That's that lead person. They get out in front and others follow them. Sometimes this style of leadership is referred to as leading by example. The other way I characterize this style of leadership is the leader is principally focused on getting down through their to-do list. And the idea is that if they stay focused on achieving their goals, others will watch and notice them, what they're doing, and will mimic and will copy the same kinds of things, because the pace setter leader thinks of their behavior as emblematic of good leadership. And what they're doing is they're totally focused on their to-do list, the things they want to achieve, and they get out in front by doing that, and then they expect others to just follow behind. I'll have more to say about all 6 of these styles later. So the next drive was that drive for affiliation, and it's going to result in 2 styles of leadership behavior that Fontaine and Jacobs identified. The first we can think of as connection, and when a leader is behaving in this kind of connection style, what they're doing is they're working to create close personal relationships with each of the individual people she or he works with directly. So in a large organization, they can't possibly connect with every single person in the organization on this close level. So what they do is they focus on the people that they have the most direct contact with on kind of a day-to-day basis. And there they try and establish that close personal relationship, because this style is going to create that social bonding that the drive for affiliation generates in people who are thinking about that. So that's one of the 2 styles that comes out of that drive for affiliation. The second is we're going to label the democratic style. And the democratic style of leadership is when a leader behaves in a way that treats everyone equally. They don't play favorites, and so they don't kind of show favoritism towards one group of people, but maybe disdain or disrespect for another. They really treat everybody equally. It's they don't They don't pay attention. They don't make decisions based upon someone's rank or seniority or friendship, because they're really trying to draw out the best from everybody's thinking. This style, more so than the connection style, this really manifests itself in meetings. So in a meeting, the person facilitating the meeting is when they call on everybody, when they are trying to draw out not just the outspoken people, the extroverts, if you will, but they really make an effort to call upon everybody around the table, so to speak, getting everybody's voice into the discussion. That would be the democratic style. So two drivers, the drive for affiliation and the drive for achievement, results in 3 of the 6 styles. So the drive for affiliation, connection, democratic, the drive for achievement, pace setting. And then this last driver, the drive for influence, it results in fully half of the 6 styles of behavior that Fontaine and Jacobs noticed. So the first one we'll label the command style. So the command style of leadership is when the leader demands immediate or complete compliance to an order or a directive or a command. And here, this style is about telling people what to do or what not to do. So this is that drive for influence that we talked about, or I talked about just a moment ago, where you're trying to persuade, you're trying to influence, but if those don't work, then you go to intimidation. So a leader in this position would try and persuade others to the point of view, would try and influence them. If that didn't work, they would simply say, you have to do this, or you have to stop doing this because my position in the organization is higher than yours. So I have that authority. So the command style is going to be that idea of signaling to other people, again, through influence or persuasion. But if those don't work, through intimidation, start doing something or stop doing something. The second style that comes out of this drive for influence, I'm going to label the big picture style. And here, what leaders do is they help people see how all the pieces fit together in an organization. They help people see what their activity, how the activity they're engaged in is part of the larger mission and goals of the organization. I like to think about this style this way. When a leader is using the big picture style or behaviors, what they often do is they take the people that they're leading to a higher elevation. So imagine we're down on the flat land, and the leader walks us up to the top of a hill. Now at the top of the hill, we can see more. We can see more of the land. We can see the different patterns on the land. And that's what leaders do when they're using this style. They help people see the big picture, because all of us tend to get focused on the activity that we're engaged in. So again, a big organization like UC Merced will have people that are focused on accounting, and that's where their attention is. And then we'll have people focused on the academic enterprise. We'll have people focused on admissions policies, and we'll have people focused on athletics, and on and on and on. Lots of things. So what the leaders who use this style do is they help all of those people, again, get to a higher elevation so they can see how all of those pieces are part of UC Merced and how they all fit together and how they're all important. The other thing that this leadership style does is it helps people not only get to a higher elevation and see more that way, see connections that way, they also help them have a longer time horizon. Because again, most of us, when we're involved in our particular activities, we tend to be focused on right now. What do we need to do right now? What's on our list of things that need to happen right now? And what leaders using this style do is that, again, they take us to a different time perspective. They help us see how our decisions made today can influence future decisions or have ramifications into the future. So when we're thinking about this style, this set of behaviors, that's what I want us to have in mind with the big picture. Coaching is the last one of the behaviors or styles that comes out of the drive for influence. This style is when leaders spend the time and effort to really understand at a deep level each person's strengths and weaknesses, and then they play to their strengths. So what a leader does who's in the coaching mode is they really spend the time, they go to the effort to understand each of us individually and what our strengths and weaknesses are. And they help us take advantage of our strengths by playing to our strengths. The command style is when you are addressing someone's weaknesses, when they need to address their weaknesses. This is the exact opposite. A coaching style helps people see things in themselves that they don't initially see. That's, again, that idea of helping people see they've got a strength that you as their leader see has more potential than they do. And then bringing that out. So in every organization, an organization's culture is going to influence which styles of behavior are favored and whether or not they work. So let me give you some examples. So in an organization that's got clear and measurable goals, both of those are important, clear and measurable, and the people who work in that organization have high levels of skill and expertise, and when all those people working in that organization with clear and measurable goals have adequate or even more resources, then this pace setting style can actually work quite well. On the other hand, organizations that don't have clear or measurable or even necessarily attainable goals, and some organizations have actually conflicting goals, in those kinds of organizations, and where the people in them have uneven levels of skill and expertise, some people having high levels of skill and expertise, some people having lower levels of skill and expertise, and then where the resources aren't adequate, this style actually can be disastrous. The metaphor that I like to use, the kind of little story to illustrate this, and this is why I like the name pace setting style, because it comes from running. So imagine a leader who is a sub 4-minute miler. So someone who can run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Now, that would put you in a very, very elite group of runners even today. Now, imagine that runner has got a group of runners that she or he is responsible for, is the leader. And some of those people that they're responsible for, they might be very fast. They might be able to run a 5-minute mile. 5-minute mile is a very fast mile. It's very different from a 4-minute mile, but it's still very fast. But some of the other people might only be able to run a 7-minute mile. Again, very fast, but not nearly as fast as 4 or even 5. And then some people might be able to run a 10-minute mile. That's still running. You can't walk that fast. So it's still running. So now they get on the track because they're going to use this pace setting style. And they say to everybody, well, just stay with me. Just stay right behind me and I'll get you across the finish line in 4 minutes. So they take off running. And some of those 5-minute milers, actually can stay with them. And even some of the 7-minute milers can stay with them for a little bit. But the 10-minute mile, people who can run a mile in 10 minutes, still running, it's not walking. Very quickly, the distance between them and the others is significant. And invariably what happens is that pace setting style, they get way ahead of everybody else, and it doesn't inspire them to run faster. It has actually the opposite effect. So that's the risk of the pace setting style, is if you're in an organization that's got very clear measurable goals, it's got everybody who's like a 4:02 miler, and they've got, plenty of resources, they can probably get under 4 minutes with that kind of leadership. Well, boy, if that's not the situation, it can be disastrous. So in organizations that need creative problem solving or buy-in, then the connection and the democratic styles work really well, because they draw people in. They create that sense of emotional safety. You can try ideas, you can run ideas by each other. Everybody gets heard from. Nobody gets kind of boxed out. Everybody's voice is important. So in those kinds of organizations where you need creative problem solving, where you need everybody agreeing to ideas, then connection and democratic work really well. On the other hand, these styles take time, and if you have to make fast decisions, if things have to happen quickly, these styles cannot be optimum. Organizations that want to build talent from within will use coaching. But the coaching style, while it is a great way to build people within an organization, it takes an enormous amount of time on the leader's part. And it unfortunately can create some potential situations where they can be either serious miscommunication, or in fact, the person in greater power could take advantage of the person in a lower position of power and authority. So again, it's a great style if you're trying to build talent, and if the leader has the time and effort and the conditions are right. Now, in organizations that have low deference to authority, then the command style can be absolutely well, maybe not disastrous, but it can be really ineffective. I actually have seen this a lot in the University of California, not simply at Davis, but I suspect at Merced. I haven't seen it directly at Merced, but I've been on many of the other campuses. And I know from talking with other faculty on those campuses that a lot of folks expect their students to have high deference to their authority as faculty members. And so when the students aren't deferring to authority, or when they are doing things, I remember very distinctly some of my colleagues complaining to me. I taught a course in communication. It was called doctoring at our School of Veterinary Medicine. And my colleagues would complain about, because we'd have these classes of 150 students, and they'd be in these large auditoriums, and they'd all have their laptops. And I know from sitting in the back sometimes, because we would sometimes team teach, I knew everybody wasn't looking at the slides that the faculty member was projecting onto the screen. They were on Facebook and YouTube and shopping sites and things like that. And when my colleagues would complain to me and say, how terrible these students don't defer to our authority, I would listen politely, but I would often say, well, you know what? It just means we need to be more interesting than what they've got on their screen. So we've got to engage them more. But anyway, low deference to authority organizations, the command style doesn't necessarily work very well. On the other hand, high deference to authority, particularly in situations, because where this style works best is when people are in positions of danger. So think firefighters, police, any kind of paramedics, any kind of kind of life and death situations, this style can be very effective because people in those kinds of organizations do tend to defer to authority. That's where it works best, where there's high deference to authority or where there's a crisis and we don't have time to really discuss options. There's a fire in the building, then the leader needs to say, okay, gather your personal belongings. We're leaving through this door. You don't take a vote. You don't check in with everybody to see how they're feeling. You use the command style. Every organization benefits from leaders who use the big picture behaviors. There's not a single organization that doesn't benefit from leaders who help everybody see how what they do contributes to the whole organization's mission and help people see how what they do affects others. So I'm going to shift gears at this point. And I want to talk about, in particular, what Fontaine and Jacobs learned, because most of what I've read in the years and years since I first encountered the work simply echoes and usually isn't nearly as clear and as direct and simple as their work. I think Ruth Jacobs and Mary Fontaine just were terrific researchers. The language they used was very clear. It was easy to understand. They definitely met Occam's razor. And a lot of people who've come behind them use contorted language that's hard to follow, but basically is saying the same thing. So some of the things Jacobs and Fontaine learned were intuitive, but some of the things they learned were not. So something that was intuitive and kind of makes sort of common sense, leaders who only used one style, and typically, or not typically, when leaders used only one style, they tend to only use one of two styles. They either use the pace setting style or they use the command style. And there are people in leadership positions who really do only use one style, either the pace setting or the command, typically. They were less effective than leaders who used any two styles. So that makes kind of intuitive sense. Leaders who used three styles were more effective than leaders who would only use two or one styles. And again, it didn't matter which three and which two or which one. The one who used three was more effective than leaders who used two or one. Again, pretty intuitive. Also, not quite as intuitive, but still fairly intuitive. The benefit of adding that second or third style to one's repertory of leadership, it created a meaningful gain, but it was not dramatic. Their next insight, however, I think was very counterintuitive. And that is leaders who could use leaders who did use, we can all use all six, but leaders who used all or used any four of those six styles, they were dramatically more effective than leaders who even used three of the six styles. So there was something really fundamentally different about leaders who used that fourth style compared to leaders who used only three or two or one styles. And then again, kind of interestingly, once you cross that threshold to using four, if you added a fifth or if you added the sixth, it did make you more effective, but not dramatically more effective. The real dramatic improvement was when leaders could add that fourth style. Again, any of the four. So that raises, I think, a very interesting question. What makes that fourth style so critical? Well, here's one possibility. I think those six styles, and I've tested people over the years with a little instrument to kind of rank their use of styles and observational studies as well. And people tend to clump. If they use more than one style, they tend to use them in these kind of two categories. If they use the connection style, they often will use the democratic style. And if they use those two, they often will use the coaching style. If they use the pace setting style, then they sometimes would use the command style. And if they use the command and pace setting, sometimes they would use the big picture. So that's what I observed is these six styles tend to clump into these two groups of 3. Where I have observed the difference in myself and in others is around decision making. Those styles on the right, pace setting, command, big picture, those tend to be faster decision-making styles, particularly with pace setting, command, because the leader just says, do this or follow me, and that's it. That's a fast way to make decisions, no question about that. The speed of decision making tends to slow down when you're using the connection or democratic or coaching styles, because you're not just telling people things, you're listening to them as well. So the other thing, and I've just alluded to it, is these styles, pace setting, command, big picture, that tends to be top-down decision-making, and connection, democratic, and coaching tends to be horizontal decision-making. Now, it is very possible that a leader who just used the pace setting, command, and big picture styles could make good top-down decisions, and every one of them could be a good, sound decision. However, and this is where I think this is adding that 4th style really matters, is if you add in, for example, the democratic style. Now you're going to slow things down a little bit, because now you're not just telling people what to do, you're listening to people. You're learning what things look like from their point of view. And I think what happens, and I think this explains other research that Fontaine and Jacobs did, is when you add that 4th style, you're going to, when talking about decision making, you're going to slow things down a little bit. But I think that slowing down is what allows you to make great decisions, not just good decisions. So if any combination of these 4 styles was dramatically more effective than anybody using 3 or less, was there a best 4? And what Jacobs and Fontaine learned is, yes, there was. And the best 4 were these: big picture, democratic, connection, and coaching. Leaders who use those 4 styles predominantly were way more effective, no matter how you would measure effectiveness. So why were those the best 4? Well, they didn't articulate answers to that question, so I'm posing some hypotheses of mine. But I think one possibility, and it goes back to decision making in a certain sense, because decision making plays out, if you will, in communication. So what happens is pace setting and command communication is top down. It's unidirectional. And those, you remember, did not make the top 4. Connection, democratic, coaching, and big picture did. And those are bidirectional. Now, big picture maybe a little less so, coaching a little less so, but they are both, even those 2, are bidirectional. A leader who's using big picture, a leader who's using coaching is going to be listening, not just talking. Pace setting and command tends to just be the leader is telling people. Another possibility is that most organizations are kind of in the middle in terms of their performance. And at the thin end of the tails, you're going to have a very small group of very high performing organizations and a small group of very low performing organizations. Now that those organizations that are low performing, that command style can be actually quite effective, because those organizations, they need a rapid change in clarity of goals or identification of goals, an improvement of skills, and a gain of resources. On the other hand, the pace setting style works really well in organizations that are high performing, because they do have clear goals. They do have a group of people who are highly skilled, highly experienced, have high levels of expertise, and they've got at least adequate, if not greater, resources. But when we're talking about organizations in the middle who maybe don't have as clear or as attainable goals, then these higher communication leadership behaviors tend to be more important, where communication needs to go across the organization. Again, these styles tend to be better. And then finally, these styles, I think, really lend themselves to helping organizations become more resourceful, even if they don't have an abundance of resources. Because I think, and this is, I think, one of the most important qualities of these 4 styles of leadership, is they help the leader and the people that they lead become more resourceful, because they help people see that we're not constrained by our resources, but we are constrained by our resourcefulness. And all of us as individuals in all organizations, almost by definition, can become, if we're led this way, can become more resourceful. All right, so I'm going to stop at that point. We've got about 6 more minutes. And what I'd like to do is invite you. I wish we had a little more time. I apologize, we don't. But I'd like to invite you. What are your thoughts about these ideas? What questions do you have? So you could use the chat feature. You could use the little emoticon raised hand, or you could just unmute and start speaking. So thoughts or questions about these ideas?
Jean, this is Teeny.
Teeny, please.
Gosh, this was wonderful. I love the way you kind of broke down these styles and trends into different categories that at the same time are kind of fluid and they don't have hard and fast boundaries. It's great. And seeing how they're mixed, you know, I'm kind of thinking of colors and how those blend and things like that. So yeah, this is really neat. I'm always interested in how people communicate. And I'm wondering, just say a little bit to us about, and you kind of did at various points, but maybe just say a little bit more about some good communication styles that embody some of these hybrids that you offered.
Yeah. Great question. Thank you. So I think of the pace setting style as communication by silence. So people who are using the pace setting style don't tend to talk much with others. They don't tend to communicate with others because their kind of modus operandi, so to speak, is just if they get in and if they're working down through their to-do list, then people will copy them, will mimic them. The risk with that style, and I think it's great, is leaders who use the pace setting style a lot tend to undervalue communication. They think that all you need to do is just go to work and work down through your to-do list, and others will see you do that and they'll mimic that. But that is I think it's a dangerous leap of imagination. Now, again, that style does work, but in a very small group of organizations that are already high performing. So it takes them to, so I think of that communication style as communication through silence. On the other hand, I think of the command style as communication through barking, through giving orders, just telling people, do this, don't do that, and not listening. So both of those styles, the leaders don't listen. And the difference is only that one is quiet and silent, and the other is barking, is giving orders. And that's why the other four styles, the emphasis is really on listening. In all of those four styles, the leader has to communicate, but they communicate after they've listened to other points of view first, because they already know what's inside of their head. And that's the difference. I think that leaders who use the pace setting style a lot, they know what's inside of their head, and they imagine that what's inside of every other person's head is the same thing in their head. Dangerous assumption. On the other hand, the person the leader who uses the command style most of the time assumes that what's in the head of other people is inferior to theirs. And so all they're trying to do is export what's in their head into the heads of everyone else, again, through influence, persuasion, or more often, quite honestly, intimidation. I'm the boss, just do what I say. The problem with both of those is that no new information ever comes in. So they've only got the basis of information that's resident in their heads. The beauty of the other four styles of leadership is that information is coming in, not just going out. And that is critical. So listening. I don't know what that chirping is. I'm in my daughter's house. I don't know. I think it could be her dog, but I don't. Yeah, he's I think he's dreaming. He's sitting right behind me. So anyway, I don't know. Teeny, does that help? Does that make some sense?
It makes very.
Yeah, can I apologize for the dog in the background? He's dreaming and he's probably chasing something. So other thoughts or question quickly, because we're unfortunately running out of time, and my apologies, I didn't leave enough time. Other thoughts, questions? Oh, good, here's a chat. Oh, thank you, Alvin. You know what? I'm going to have to say thank you at this point because I really want to honor the 1 o'clock break. However, please note the 2 email addresses down there. You can send an email to my UC Merced email account. I tend to check that once or twice a day, not as frequent on that one because it doesn't automatically go to my phone the way that my UC Davis was. But you can send me an email, C Crumley. My legal name is Charles. My first name is Charles. So C Crumley at ucmerced.edu, or you could send it to my UC Davis account. And my legal name is Charles Eugene. That's where the gene comes from. So that one you would have to send it to CE Crumley at ucdavis.edu. And I'll be very happy to respond to any thoughts or questions that you might have. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate the time today.